Good day and thank you for joining Civilnet. My guest today is Mr. Ralph Simon. He's, popularly known as the father of ringtones. Also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in the UK, a member of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences in the US, and he's here to participate in the International Forum of Eurasian Partnership. Thank you for being here. All this introduction as I was making it kind of did make sense and didn't make sense. Your background also, and I forgot to mention for our viewers, person who's worked with stars like Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, right? Janet Jackson, a producer to these stars.
Not Janet Jackson, but have worked with a number of artists because in an early phase of my career, I was involved in finding talent, recording the talent and trying to make hits with the talent.
And you've been more than successful.
Had some lucky breaks and some good songs and some great talent.
Well, let's start probably from the end of the conversation. As finding talent and putting the talent out there, knowing that, guessing that it will, or having the instinct that it would be a success. Right. How does that work?
Well, I think a lot comes down to a fortunate background. I was raised in Africa, and when I was at university, I formed a band, and the band would play, and it was a way that I could pay for my university fees. And one of the things you learn if you play in a band is you learn what is a floor filler. Do you know what a floor filler is?
No.
Okay, so if you're playing for people dancing, you got to play a song that keeps the floor filled, a floor filler. Which songs make people dance the most? Which songs make people leave the dance floor? It turned out to be incredible training to understand what popular taste might be. Around about that period, I started a record company, looking for talent, signing talent, taking them into the recording studio, shaping the songs, giving advice on how the song should be made, and started having some hits, and then decided that Africa was too small a place, or the music was perhaps not really having wide global impact, and so I decided to leave and move to London. And moved to London at an interesting time when the whole scene in London was just changing, and it was the start of what was then the punk movement, and was very fortunate in meeting a lot of these punk rockers and punk musicians and punk songwriters that were just starting to come up, people like Elvis Costello, and that then led to working with some interesting people, and it kind of developed from there. Then the company became very successful. We started having lots of hits, and then opened up in America, and then signed the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake, amongst other people, and the company became very well known.
So you're also the founder and the CEO of Mobilium Global, which
right.
is it exactly what you do in your second career, like find the flow fillers, but at this point
Ear
in the mobile industry and the
correct. And what happened was I had gone to live in Los Angeles because I was running a record company there called Capitol Records, very well-known label, working with some great talent, the Beastie Boys, Radiohead, Supergrass. Who else did we work with there? Well, the Beach Boys, and working on some of the Beatles material, but primarily Beastie Boys. Did a lot of work with the Beastie Boys. I love the Beastie Boys. And Radiohead, of course, when they first started. But I could see that the music business was changing. There were some developments in Silicon Valley where the traditional way of listening to music was changing. People were listening to music online, and it was a time when a company called Napster had started in Silicon Valley, and this was a game changer where a young gentleman by the name of Sean Fanning decided that the way that people were listening to music was not the way that it was going to be in the future. And all those people that would go and buy CDs at a record shop was going to change because they'd all want to listen online. And that impressed me tremendously, and it made me leave this big record company that had been going for nearly 80 years, because I also saw at the time that most young people had started sending text messaging on phones. And I've always watched what young people do, because if you can see what young people are doing in the UK, in America, in India, in Africa, in Europe, in the Caucasus, you get a sense of what's coming next. And I've always been completely obsessed and fascinated by what's coming next. And I kept seeing young people getting the very basic phones, mainly Nokia at that time, and I thought, I had an aha experience. I went, aha. People are doing things on their phones. We got to look into this. I found a young team in Los Angeles, where I was living at the time. Big Armenian population in LA, as you know.
As we all know.
As we all know. The Glendale Mafia, definitely. But I found this young team, and they were just a fantastic group of three people who had come up with a very interesting piece of technology that allowed you to listen to music on the phone and then be able to send a small little piece of music to another phone in an interesting, cool way. I forget the Armenian word for cool, verjnia. Vergia.
Verchna, which basically that's the end, which
that's
is that like
when I saw that I said Verchna. Yes. So I basically said to these fellows, I think what you got is great. I will invest some money into you and let's make a startup. Someone in Helsinki, in Finland, heard about this and invited me to go and meet with them. Who was the somebody? The somebody was Nokia. So I got on a plane from the hot sunshine of Los Angeles and California and went to the middle of winter in Helsinki, and it gets cold there, as you know, in the middle of winter. You know, if you have a pair of red jeans and you put them out to dry overnight outside your window, when you go and get them in the morning, they've turned blue. It's so cold. Not really.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I was wondering who has red jeans.
No, yeah. Yes, that's true. But I was standing on the pavement outside the hotel waiting for the taxi to take me to the Nokia headquarters, and I saw this small group of teenagers on the pavement, and two of the teenagers were, I didn't know it at the time, but they were texting. It was because Finnish teenagers are always way ahead of American teenagers, for sure, ahead of Canadian teenagers, possibly, ahead of European teenagers, absolutely. And I was just amazed, and one of the teenagers came to me, and as his phone rang, it rang with a melody. And I had a major aha experience. I looked at that and I went, aha. And I went up to this guy and I said, what was that? Because in those days, the phone just rang with like a generic computer-like sounding melody. It sounded awful. And he said to me that he had been drinking a few nights before. He got very, very drunk, and he'd set his alarm on his phone. And when the alarm rang, it was that traditional Nokia phone ring, and to him it sounded like 1,000 dentists drilling into his head. Obviously he had a bad hangover, and he said, as a result of that, I had to change it, and I think I've come up with a way to make some melodies that are not this awful computer music. And I looked at that and I thought, aha, what if you could take the music of the Beastie Boys and do that with the Beastie Boys? What if you could do that with Radiohead? What if you could do that with...
Well, Radiohead wouldn't wake anyone up.
They wouldn't wake anyone up,
Yeah.
that's true. But what if you could do that with then Michael Jackson? Or what if you could do it with something really cool?
Well, in Armenia, did you get a chance to get a feel of the innovation going on, or ideas, or the whole environment? Is there any aha moment? Do you expect any aha moments for Armenia or for yourself in Armenia?
Well, a few years ago in London, I happened to have the great privilege of meeting a former Armenian Prime Minister by the name of Armen Sarkisian, a brilliant guy who, when he was a younger man, had actually invented an incredible game called Tetris. It was Armenian invented. And I had started working with his son, who was very involved in developing some music tech. So I was always aware that Yerevan in particular was a city that really should be and could be, and in fact is, what I call an innovation city. That is to say, a city where there's creativity, there's technology, there are techies and geeks and nerds that are thinking of doing something to emulate what they hear about in Silicon Valley, or what they hear about in London, or what they hear about in Berlin. And so I was always fascinated about seeing what the real story was in Yerevan, because one thing that I knew from a few years ago was great coding and great imagineering, not engineering, imagineering, imagining and engineering combined. So when I got an invitation to come and be a speaker at this first ever forum for the Eurasian Economic Community, an important community which essentially is Eurasia, Armenia, Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan,
and the Russian Federation, Kyrgyz Republic.
Correct. But of all of those, I always thought to myself, Russia's a big country, but once you go out of Moscow and St. Petersburg, even if you go to places like Novosibirsk, or you go to Smolensk, or wherever you go, it's essentially Moscow and St. Petersburg driven. But what about smaller places where there's great creativity and great people that have got an aesthetic and a sense of art? And so I was delighted to come here, and I can see that Yerevan has absolutely, without question, the potential for becoming one of the world's very strong innovation centers. What else?
The fact that we're kind of, as you said, we're following up what's happening in Silicon Valley and reinventing it, or catching up. Are we going to catch up and start leading, or we're going to be catching up for a very long time?
Well, I'll tell you, an interesting lesson for me was reading the story, the amazing, incredible story actually, of a young man from Ukraine. Now, if you are raised in Ukraine, let's say you come from Kiev, and you read about the founders of Google, the founders of Facebook, the founders of Amazon, what they call the GAFA countries, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. Those 4 companies have really been responsible for changing the way the earth thinks, downloads, speaks, interacts, goes on mapping. And I followed the story of this young man from Ukraine whose name is Jan Koum, K-O-U-M. Jan Koum always had this idea about messaging on phones. And he thought, I'm going to create an app that will help people with messaging, but the app will be such a cool app that you'll also be able to do what you can do with Skype, but with this message. What name should I give this company? And he thought about it and said, WhatsApp. WhatsApp! What a name! That's what I'm going to call my company. He came from Ukraine. Someone coming from Ukraine, taking that to Silicon Valley, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook sees it and ends up paying Jan Koum $19 billion for WhatsApp. And now WhatsApp is as big as one of the biggest applications in the world. So I think to myself, what stops a young man or a young woman, because there are women geeks, it's not just guys, they're very strong women in Armenia with great ideas. What stops an Armenian woman, an Armenian man or young person developing something that is so cool and so great that it could be successful?
What could stop?
Well, the only thing that could stop is your own restraint and your own inhibitions. A lot of people come up with a great idea and they say, I'll never be successful. No one will believe I can do this. And this reminded me of the early days of the talent. I know when Lady Gaga first started, a good friend of mine signed Lady Gaga to her record contract. And how did she sign Lady Gaga? She'd heard about this young woman who was an incredible piano player. And she asked her to come around to her house. And she told me the story. She said that she was going to have a conversation to find out what this woman, whose name, her real name, Lady Gaga's real name is Stephanie Germanotta, comes from an Italian family. And she was going to sit down with Stephanie and find out what drove Stephanie's artistic ambition. The phone rang and she had to take a phone in the next room. She walked to the next room and heard this piano playing that was just incredible. And what she said was when she heard the piano playing, she had a multiple eargasm. Do you know what an eargasm is?
Well, I can guess.
Okay. You hear that when you hear something great. You hear it. And that made her sign Lady Gaga, and then, of course, the rest is history. So anyway, I believe, and particularly after meeting with a lot of people here in Yerevan, and today having a great opportunity of sitting down with the president, Sargsyan, and having a long chat with him about innovation and whether the country has got the creative talent that absolutely without question, with the right kind of investment and the right kind of opportunity and the right kind of belief, there's a lot of opportunity here.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we thank our viewers for joining us, especially people with great ideas. I hope you found this conversation inspiring.